Number 10. Escape from the Rock. In June of 1962, 3 inmates escaped federal prison on Alcatraz Island and vanished into the San Francisco Bay. To this day, these 3 escapists have still never been seen. So far, they're the only people to ever successfully escape Alcatraz. But why was Alcatraz so inescapable? It was built as a defensive fortification for the Navy in the 1850s. Alcatraz housed military prisoners from the 1860s to the early 1930s. And when the United States Army finally transferred control of the island over to the Department of Justice in 1934, it was decided it would be a good place to open a maximum security prison. Alcatraz was to be used for the most hardened criminals in the prison system. It was the government's way of taking a hard stance against the crime ravaging the country. Even Al Capone was imprisoned in Alcatraz. As for those who escaped, it was Frank Morris, a man with a history of breaking out of prisons. Then there was John and Clarence Anglin, who were serving time for a bank robbery. And lastly, Alan West also participated in the escape, though he was left behind by the other 3 men. The escape was quite complex. They spent months digging through air vents with spoons and shaping fake heads out of paper and soap and human hair. In the end, they were listed as missing and presumed drowned because nobody ever believed they could have made it across the San Francisco Bay to land, even though they had crafted makeshift rafts from raincoats stolen or donated to them by fellow inmates. To date, no bodies have ever been found. 50 years later, in 2013, authorities received a mysterious letter. It was reportedly from John Anglin. As reported by the Vintage News, the letter starts with, "My name is John Anglin. I escaped from Alcatraz in June of 1962 with my brother Clarence and Frank Morris." The writer goes on to say, "I'm 83 years old and in bad shape. I have cancer. Yes, we all made it that night, but barely." He says he will give himself up in exchange for medical treatment and 1 year in prison. The FBI did some tests that came out inconclusive and dropped the case. If it really was from John Anglin, he would be 91 years old today. Number 9. Escape from Camp Waterloo. Jerry Bergevin would have been over 80 years old today if still alive. He escaped from a Michigan prison camp in April of 1969 while doing time for burglary. And after 44 years on the run, nobody has any idea whether this guy is alive or dead. But finally, the Michigan Department of Corrections called the search off and granted Jerry an administrative discharge because of his age and how long the world has gone without hearing from him. If he is indeed still alive, he's just been given a pardon, but it probably doesn't mean much to an old geezer. According to Jerry's granddaughter, who spent years trying to piece together her family's turbulent past, Jerry probably died years ago. She believes he's long gone and doesn't hold up much hope for his return. As for how Jerry escaped Camp Waterloo in the first place, shortly after being imprisoned, he began sending letters begging to be transferred out of the state prison to Camp Waterloo to attend a dental technician training program. Prison officials were concerned because Jerry had behaved poorly in prison, but then in 1969 they relented and allowed for the transfer. The new prison was hardly a prison at all. There was just a measly fence with barbed wire keeping the prisoners inside. Jerry vanished from this place before he even started the dental class, and he's not been seen since. Number 8. Escape to Cuba. Joanne Chesimard is a notorious cop killer and was actually the first woman to ever be placed on the FBI's most wanted list. She was convicted of first-degree murder back in 1973 after shooting state trooper Werner Forrester on the New Jersey Turnpike. She was a member of the Black Liberation Army and considered to be an extreme radical. She was sentenced to life in prison but ended up escaping from the Clinton Correctional Facility for Women in 1979. She's now been on the run for 4 decades. The last she was seen, Joanne was in Cuba in 1984, where she'd been given political asylum despite being a murderer. It's believed that Joanne has lived in Cuba ever since, enjoying a life of fun and sun, not being behind bars where she evidently should be. And now it's time to learn how she escaped, and it's perhaps the most dramatic prison escape that you're going to hear about today. It happened on November 2nd, 1979, when 3 members of the Black Liberation Army visited Joanne in prison, drew their .45 caliber pistols, then took 2 correctional officers as hostages and waved around a stick of dynamite. They managed to steal a van and escape without injuring anyone, leaving the officers in the parking lot. Joanne flew immediately to the Bahamas and was never seen on American soil again. But unfortunately for her helpers, they were mostly charged with assisting in her escape. The FBI is offering $1 million for any tips that could lead to Joanne Chesimard's arrest. Number 7. Escape the Tower of London. The Tower of London was once a terrifying place where prisoners would be kept in filthy dungeons full of rats, imprisoned for years, and sometimes sent to meet the executioner's axe. The Tower of London is about 900 years old and is an imposing fortress that still stands in the middle of central London today. It used to house the crown jewels and has held hundreds of famous prisoners throughout the years. But it was in 1716 the Countess Winifred Maxwell, the wife of the 5th Earl of Nithsdale of Truckare House, helped her husband to escape on the eve of his execution. He had originally been imprisoned after participating in the 1715 Battle of Preston. He'd also had all of his titles and lands forfeited. To try and get her husband out of prison, Winifred first lobbied in London for his release. She even met with King George I in person and tried to plead her husband's case. Her diplomacy failed and she had to resort to sneakier methods. The day before William was to be executed, she went to his cell wearing an extra petticoat and equipped with all the furnishings of an 18th century lady. While she visited her husband, she had many of her friends coming and going to make it look as though a procession of grievers were saying their goodbyes. It was during this procession that William escaped, dressed as a woman. Immediately after escaping the Tower of London, William and his wife fled to France. They lived long and healthy lives, and Winifred died 5 years after her husband in Rome in 1749. What do you think of everything that Countess did for her husband? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Number 6. Flee to Portugal. George Wright was convicted of murder in 1962 and was accused of participating in an armed robbery in which a dedicated World War II veteran and gas station owner was killed in cold blood. George spent several years in state prison until he escaped in 1970, and then hijacked a flight from Detroit to Miami dressed as a priest. The hijackers demanded the airplane be flown to Algeria, and it was during the trip to Algeria that George pulled the gun he had stashed in his hollowed-out Bible and put it against the flight attendant's head. He demanded money, or he would begin throwing dead bodies out of the door of the airplane every single minute. Well, everything actually worked out for George. He commandeered the Delta Airlines DC-8, and he got away with a hefty ransom, and then vanished into thin air. George eventually settled in Portugal, where he lived in peace for 15 years before the United States figured out he was in a small village 25 miles from Lisbon. He was tracked down by a task force. But much to the disappointment of the US government, Portugal denied their request to have him extradited. According to the Portuguese, the case is over and the US has no business with George. A spokesman for the Justice Department said they were disappointed with the outcome of the case. But on the flip side, George Wright said he was very happy with the outcome of the case. He also said he's at peace with himself and the law. He's even thinking about writing a book or making a movie about his life. Number 5. Frederick Morris. Frederick Morris is one of the weirdest serial killers in American history. He was an Austrian national who moved to New York City and killed 8 elderly patients using poison while employed at a nursing home. Frederick had used arsenic and chloroform to kill the elderly residents, though during the same time as the murders, 17 residents had died at the home, suggesting he may have had a hand in those deaths too. When questioned by the police, Frederick admitted to the murders and was oddly cooperative. He claimed he was simply putting them out of their misery, since many were old and had difficulties functioning. He was then diagnosed as being a megalomaniac, and he was ultimately committed to an insane asylum. But Frederick only spent a small amount of time at the Hudson River State Hospital. While his deportation to Austria was pending, he escaped the institution in May of 1916. Frederick resurfaced in 1917 and was found living under an alias, but then he disappeared again. In 1923, a skeletonized corpse was discovered and identified as the potential remains of Frederick Morris, though he was only identified because of the specific shoes he was wearing, which were known to be his favorite. Either Frederick died, or he very cleverly faked his own death. Number 4. 60 years on the run. John Patrick Hannon was only 22 years old when he fled the Verne prison, located on the Isle of Portland in the southern coast of England. This escape happened on December 22, 1955. Today, John Patrick would be in his 80s, assuming, of course, he's still alive. Nobody actually knows if John Patrick survived following his prison escape, but he probably did, seeing as he was never registered as dead. According to the Huffington Post, he was by default the world's most successful prison fugitive since he's technically been on the run for over 60 years. It all started because John Patrick was sentenced to spend 21 months in jail for stealing a car and assaulting 2 police officers. Instead of doing the time, he broke out of the facility after only 30 days. He used the classic escape method of tying his bed sheets together and climbing over the wall. John then robbed a gas station, stole clothes, beer, and cigarettes, and then fled the island. Another young man who escaped with him was discovered 16 hours after the incident and sent straight back to prison. But John Patrick made it all the way out and is believed to have returned to his home in Ireland. To this day, John is still a wanted man, though the local police departments gave up actively searching for him in 1998. Number 3. Twice escaped. Glenn Godwin escaped prison not once, but twice. He escaped first after being convicted of robbery and murder back in 1981 and sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison. He was brought to California's Folsom Prison in 1987 after first trying to escape from a correctional facility in Tracy. He tried to escape again in Folsom and actually got away with it. He convinced another inmate to give him a job in an area of the prison that had lower security. He then managed to escape through a storm drain. On the other side of the drain, he rafted across the American River to his awaiting getaway car. According to a prison employee involved in the investigation, after finding the tunnel where Godwin escaped from, there was a white smiley face painted on the ground as if Godwin were mocking them. But Godwin turned up at a prison in Mexico in 1991 after being arrested and convicted on charges of cocaine trafficking. He was about to be extradited back to the United States of America when he escaped prison for a second time. FBI Special Agent Dan Rodriguez said in 2014 that Godwin probably committed a murder while inside the prison in exchange for help escaping. Since then, Godwin has remained at large and is still wanted by the authorities. Number 2. Glenn Chambers. Glenn Chambers beat a woman to death in 1975 and was convicted by a jury of first-degree murder. The jury sentenced him to death. However, the Florida Supreme Court decided against the death sentence and instead ordered that he spend the rest of his life in jail. It would be 25 years after being incarcerated that Glenn Chambers finally escaped the Polk Correctional Institution on February 21st of 1990, and to this day, Glenn is still a wanted man. But how did he escape 25 years into his prison sentence? Glenn was building furniture in his prison work program and somehow managed to hide inside the furniture he was building and have himself shipped to Daytona Beach. This is arguably the cleverest prison escape we've heard of today. It was 30 years ago that Glenn escaped, and he's still considered to be at large. If he's alive, he would be about 70 years old. Number 1. Helicopter escape. Benjamin Haddam Barbeau has been sentenced to 16 years in prison for his role in a daring yet failed helicopter escape from a detention center in Quebec back in 2013. As you probably already know, prison breaks don't really happen all that often anymore. With technology, security cameras, and everything else we have at our disposal today, there isn't a lot an inmate can do to escape. And yet one happened in Canada in 2013, when Benjamin and another inmate named Danny were rescued by two of their accomplices who hijacked a helicopter and forced the pilot to fly over the jail where the two men could climb aboard. The entire prison break was even captured on surveillance footage. But unfortunately for these guys, they didn't make it very far. According to CBC News, the police recaptured both inmates just hours after their escape and have since locked them in the highest security section of the building. Benjamin has been forced to stay inside his cell for 20 hours a day and to have no physical contact with any other inmates, which honestly sounds worse than a death sentence. In fact, Benjamin's isolation has been called a violation of his human dignity, and he managed to get himself a reduced sentence. He now has 9 years left of his prison sentence, though of course he is still locked up for a reason, so don't have too much sympathy for this guy. He was convicted of 2 murders along with 2 separate attempted murders. At only 18 years old, a woman in Texas has proved herself to be one of the most dangerous, if not in the world, then at least in her local area. This woman has been charged with murder after apparently luring a man, Adrian Wells, out of his apartment with the promise of intimacy so that 3 men could rob him at gunpoint. But they didn't just take his money, the victim was also shot to death. Dallas police arrested Sydney Whitaker on charges of capital murder, according to the arrest warrant affidavit. Even though she didn't technically murder the victim, she participated in his death by facilitating the home invasion robbery which left the man dead. But what exactly happened with this brutal killing? From what police were able to put together, Whitaker may have been the orchestrator of the whole operation. She had met the victim just days before and was harassing him to let her come over and perform a certain act upon him. The victim's friends told him it was very unusual and he shouldn't even consider it. But it's hard to tell hormones what to do. After the victim went outside to meet Whitaker, the armed men grabbed him, forced him back into his apartment, stole money from everyone inside, and then started blasting for no reason. The victim was killed and one of his friends was wounded, and Whitaker will probably spend the rest of her young years behind bars. Number 9. The Godmother. Maria Liccardi grew up as the daughter of a mafia boss in Italy. She grew to become one of the most powerful female mob bosses in history, ruling the city of Naples from between 1993 until she was arrested in 2001. Home in Italy, she was called La Madrina, meaning the godmother. She rose to power as a young woman, taking over after her brothers and husband were arrested. She became the first female boss of her clan. She kept business running smoothly and participated in a whole heap of lucrative rackets. Everything from smuggling drugs and cigarettes to forced protection and prostitution. Under the Godmother's leadership, the mafia in Naples actually became more sophisticated, more organized, and more powerful. One of the most outlandish things she participated in was the purchasing of women from nearby Albania, reportedly for $2,000 each. She then forced these girls into prostitution, shooting them up with drugs to prevent them from escaping. Her downfall came in 1999 after a shipment of heroin arrived from Turkey. Maria said it was too strong and it would kill the average drug user. However, it got packaged and sold anyway, and soon the streets were full of dead drug addicts. There was public outcry and the police cracked down hard. There was a brief clan war afterwards, and Maria mobilized foot soldiers in a deadly gang war that resulted in at least 120 deaths in the region. She made it onto the list of most wanted criminals in Italy and evaded capture for at least 2 years before ultimately being apprehended and arrested. Number 8. Amelia Dyer. Amelia Dyer lived between 1837 and 1896 and is one of the most prolific murderers in the history of England. She operated as a baby farmer and was hung in 1896 for a single murder, though it's agreed that she probably committed many more. Amelia began her career as a baby farmer early on, and if you're wondering what exactly a baby farmer was, it was a person who adopted unwanted children. This was because of the Poor Law Amendment Act in 1834 that allowed men to abandon illegitimate children without having to support them financially. This meant a lot of women were left in dire situations, at which point they would hand their baby to a baby farmer. Baby farmers were supposed to take care of the children, but they were usually mistreated and often even killed just out of convenience. Amelia ran her business by adopting children, getting paid, and then allowing them to die from starvation. As the kids were starving, she would feed them opium syrup to keep them quiet as they slowly faded away. But even opium syrup can get expensive, so she started killing the youngsters quicker. This allowed her to adopt more kids and to make more money. She eluded authorities for quite some time before a doctor grew suspicious of the number of babies dying under her care. She was charged with neglect and given 6 months of hard labor. But she returned to baby farming afterwards, relocated to a new area, and just kept on killing babies. Authorities finally busted her later on and arrived at her estate. They discovered the stench of death. Then they started pulling baby bodies out of the nearby river, and it became clear what she'd done. Even though she was only hung for the murder of one child, estimates say she killed anywhere between 200 and 400. Number 7. Cannibal Woman. Natalia Baksheva, a native of Russia, is a serial killing cannibal. She was recently arrested on suspicion of eating at least 30 people and then coaxing her husband into killing a waitress who just so happened to flirt with him a little too hard. According to state investigators, her husband was suffering from tuberculosis at the time, and his role in the murder and cannibalism would be dealt with later, though he was of course already locked up. As for Natalia, police found a collection of steamed and frozen human remains in her kitchen, and the remains belonged to the final victim, the 35-year-old waitress. Police also found 19 preserved slices of skin and a jar filled with pickled human pieces. She was only arrested for this one murder after she apparently demanded her husband kill the waitress, and he pulled out a knife and stabbed her several times in the chest. The couple then brought her body back to the house, chopped her up, took selfies with her severed body parts, then cooked and ate her a little bit. It was after Natalia was arrested that she admitted to having at least 30 victims over the past 2 decades. She had apparently worked together with her husband to lure women from online dating apps and websites for the sole purpose of murdering and eating them. So do you think cannibals are born or made? Let me know in the comments below. And if you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. Number 6. The Old Lady Killer. In rural Hidalgo, Mexico back in 1957, Juan Barraza was born. Her father was a police officer and her mother was an alcoholic prostitute. She had a pretty rough childhood. She never learned to read, her relationship with her parents was rocky at best, and her mother even pimped her out at the young age of 12 in exchange for free beer. Suffice it to say, she wasn't born into the best of situations. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, Juana toured Mexico as a masked wrestler who went by the name La Dama del Silencio, or Lady of Silence. But it wasn't until 1995 that she began a life of crime. She started with minor stealing, upgraded to burglary, then hatched a plan to steal from the elderly with a friend. Juana and her friend would dress as nurses to gain access to old people's houses and then rob them. The murders began in 2002. Juana began killing old people seemingly for fun. In 2003, so many old people had been killed by strangulation that the police knew they had a serial killer on their hands. And the police eventually caught her only after a witness saw her leaving the home of a murder victim. She was tried with 30 murders, found guilty of 16, and then sentenced to 759 years in prison. Number 5. Rival Killer. In 2007, Harmohinder Sanghira, also known as Mindy, was a dentistry student who got busted killing a 17-year-old girl named Sana and was sentenced to spend the rest of her life in jail. At the time, Mindy had been in a relationship with Sana's husband. Mindy didn't know that he was married and that the girl was expecting to have a baby. But she eventually found out, and when she did, she took a kitchen knife from her home, drove 115 miles from Birmingham to Greater Manchester, and stabbed the teenage girl in her bedroom 43 times, stabbing through her and into her unborn baby. It was a double homicide. But here's where things get even crazier. Mindy told the court that she hadn't killed anyone. She had only gone to the house to rat out the cheating husband. She said Sana was fine when she left. There was also no forensic evidence that linked her to the crime, but she still got a life sentence for the murder. So either Mindy is a very dangerous woman who belongs behind bars, or the cheating husband became enraged when the two lovers met, stabbing his own wife to death. Then the court was tricked into putting an innocent woman in jail. So who do you think the murderer really was? Number 4. Prom Queen Killer. Darlene Gentry was a prom queen in high school. She attended Texas State Technical College and met a man named Keith, who she would marry in 1999, before moving next door to Keith's very own parents in Robinson, Texas. The couple had 3 boys. Darlene became a nurse, and Keith made a great living as an electrical engineer. It was kind of the perfect marriage. At least, that's how it looked from the outside. But internally, the couple was having serious difficulties. They fought all the time, and Darlene apparently had a very bad spending problem. Then one day, Darlene put a gun against Keith's head and shot him as he slept. From what Darlene told police officers, she had gone out with her friends that night before, and when she returned, Keith was furious about the credit card bill. She then claimed that because of the fight, she went to sleep in their son's room, and when she woke up in the morning, she found the door open and her husband dead. She told the police that a burglar did it. As it turned out, a burglar was not involved at all. Darlene was the one that had shot her husband with a .22 handgun from his own gun safe to try and collect his $750,000 life insurance policy. Number 3. Jodi Arias. Jodi Arias has been described as a carefree, beautiful blonde, aspiring photographer, and even a very, very dangerous woman. She met a man named Travis Alexander and the two fell into a relationship. And even though Travis seemed to be happy, his friends tried to warn him that there was something not quite right about his new girlfriend. They were fearful for his safety as they saw the relationship growing volatile. One friend was quoted saying they feared Travis would be found chopped up in her freezer. Well, Travis Alexander was found dead on June 9, 2008. He was discovered stabbed several times and shot in his head. Everyone was shocked, except for his friends who had anticipated something like this could possibly happen. According to ABC News, Arias told authorities that they were attacked by masked intruders who seemed fixated on killing Travis. And yet these lunatic killers forced her to leave and told her to never tell a soul. Police obviously didn't believe this crazy story, and she has since been sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. We still don't know why she murdered him, what she could have possibly gotten out of it, or really just how crazy this woman truly was. Number 2. The Burmanzi Horror. Marie Manning was a Swiss maid who had a hankering for murder. Both she and her husband were convicted for murdering Marie's lover, Patrick O'Connor, in a disturbing case that became known as the Burmanzi Horror. When the execution came on November 13, 1849, it was the first time a husband and wife had been executed at the same time in England since the year 1700. It was such a rare occasion that even Charles Dickens attended the execution and based some of his future characters on Marie. But just what exactly happened for her and her husband to be hanged? It was August 9, 1849, and Marie's lover was invited to her home to dine with her and her husband. But it was not to be an ordinary dining experience. When Patrick sat down, he was shot in the back of the head at close range, then buried underneath the flagstones in the kitchen. But it was a pretty bad idea to bury the body inside their own house, as police officers noticed something was off a week later during the investigation. But it was on the same day that the police realized Patrick had been murdered that Marie visited the dead man's house to steal his railway shares and all his money. Marie then fled and left her husband behind, hoping to get a clean getaway. She didn't get very far, as she was tracked down in Edinburgh trying to trade off the dead guy's property. Her husband was caught shortly after, and they were both hung together as heartless murderers. Number 1. Ice Cream Killer. Estebaliz Carranza is the Ice Cream Killer, one of the most fascinating female killers in recent history. She was beautiful, young, and very successful. She operated an ice cream parlor in Austria, but even though she was so pleasant and appealing on the outside, she was a cold killer on the inside. In 2008, she killed her ex-husband. Then 2 years later, she shot her boyfriend in the back of the head. Both men were dismembered with a chainsaw. She killed them because apparently the first was violent and lazy, and the second was unfaithful. Rather than simply ending the relationships, it seemed more convenient to simply kill them. After Estebaliz killed both men, she hacked them up in the basement of her ice cream shop and stored their body parts in freezers, then filled the basement with air fresheners. But in 2011, construction workers accidentally stumbled upon the corpses in her basement. Estebaliz fled in a cab before the police could arrive to apprehend her, and wound up 300 miles away in Italy. She was eventually discovered hiding with a street musician and was taken back to Austria, where she was deemed dangerous and mentally abnormal. Even a psychiatrist said she had a personality disorder and would probably kill again if left free. In the town of Aurora, police dispatchers received an emergency call saying that gunshots had been fired at the Wells Fargo bank and that there could be a robbery in progress. Over a dozen officers responded within just minutes and set up a police perimeter. They were ready to take down the bank robbers the second they came out of the bank. According to the eyewitnesses, there were gunshots heard coming from the bank, and then a white Chevy Suburban SUV took off at a very high speed. There was also somebody spotted running out of the building. It looked like a bank robbery was going on. The police actually went into the bank and checked the customers for weapons, and then handcuffed them. It was during the handcuffing that police found out that there hadn't been any gunshots at all. There was actually a holiday party going on in the bank, and some of the helium balloons had popped, creating a noise like gunfire. The whole thing had been a dramatic false alarm. Nobody was robbing the bank, and it was a big waste of time on the part of the police and really everyone else. Then again, it's not really such a far-fetched thing for a bank to get robbed in Colorado. According to FBI reports, in 2010 alone, there were 163 bank robberies in Colorado, and only 97 of them were solved. I mean, I would have been as certain as the police that there was something nefarious afoot if I were there, wouldn't you? Number 9. Kayaking gone wrong. Colorado is a great place to go kayaking, but you better make sure you have a strong heart. A man from Colorado recently died on a kayaking trip through the Green River in Dinosaur National Monument of what some authorities suspect may have been a heart attack. Staff at the park were notified that an inflatable kayak with a 60-year-old man in it had flipped over. Witnesses managed to get the man out of the water and tried to resuscitate him using CPR, but he was unconscious and unresponsive. He had to be airlifted out by a medical helicopter and taken to the Memorial Hospital in Craig. Sadly, he didn't make it. Most likely he had some type of congenital heart defect, but it wasn't until he was extremely stressed and agitated while kayaking that his heart gave out on him. At the hospital, he was declared dead, and to everyone's sadness. While it might have been fun and games to take a kayak down a Colorado river, it can also apparently lead to a critical, life-threatening heart attack. Next time you're thinking about going kayaking or engaging in other extreme sports, you might want to make sure you're in perfect health before you go out into the wilderness. Number 8. Brawling at an InNOut. Only in Colorado do wild brawls erupt outside of burger joints. In 2020, a fistfight was captured on video happening outside of an InNOut burger. This was in Aurora, while customers were waiting in line at one of the 2 new locations of the fast food chain that just appeared in the city. Understandably, people were getting very hungry and very impatient as they waited to get their hands on a delicious, savory cheeseburger. Apparently, some people had to wait hours just to get a burger and fries. Honestly, I would have gone to just a different restaurant, wouldn't you? I mean, your time is valuable. Couldn't you just come back a week later and try the burger without a line? What do you think of all this nonsense about waiting for a simple fast food burger? Anyway, during all that waiting, the hunger got worse, and temper started to flare. 3 of them ended up in a brawl while trying to get their burgers, with one of them somehow pantsless in the middle of a 3-way melee. The guys did calm down and stop fighting after some people intervened. But we don't know if they ever did get those burgers, or if they got out of line and went home embarrassed. Number 7. The Deadly Sulfur Cave. There's a mysterious cave located near one of Colorado's most iconic ski towns, Steamboat Springs. It's known only as Sulfur Cave, and it's unlike any other found throughout the entire state. According to David Steinman from the zoology department at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, there's a creepy brood of terrifying worms found to only live inside of this cave and nowhere else in the entire world. David actually studies the cave using special breathing equipment because it's so full of toxic gases that going into it unprotected can result in death. And yet somehow these worms make this poisonous atmosphere their home. I guess life always finds a way, I tell you what. As for these creepy worms, there are tens of thousands of them living inside of the cave. They're the color of blood. They eat sulfur-oxidizing bacteria, and they could be hundreds of millions of years old. While Colorado is known for its great mountains and awesome rivers, now you can think of it as home to the creepiest collection of bloodworms in the world, living inside of a deadly poison cave. What's the creepiest thing you've ever seen in a cave? Tell me about it down in the comments. And remember to subscribe to World List if you haven't already for more intense and awesome videos just like this one. Number 6. Brain Dead from TikTok. In Denver, the popular viral video app TikTok has turned deadly. It happened in 2021 when a young boy from suburban Denver was put in critical condition after attempting a TikTok challenge, daring young people to choke themselves until they black out and lose consciousness. It's known as the Blackout Challenge, and it's wildly dangerous and perhaps the stupidest challenge since that challenge to eat Tide Pods. The kid's brother found him passed out in the bathroom of their home after bragging about how long he could hold his breath. The family quickly got him to the hospital, but according to local news, doctors later revealed that the boy was brain dead and could be that way for the rest of his life. He's currently in life support and in dire shape. And as for the Blackout Challenge, well, it's actually been going on with young children and teenagers since the 90s. TikTok is just making it popular once again. If you think you should try every dangerous fad on social media, well, think again. It's just not worth the risk to try and gain some clout online, trust me. Number 5. Attacks by bears. In Colorado, you can be attacked by bears at just about any minute. As recently as May of 2021, workers with Colorado Parks and Wildlife discovered human remains inside the stomachs of a local black bear and her 2 cubs. Authorities now suspect that the bears are responsible for killing and then consuming a woman who had gone missing from near the Durango area. The bears were tracked down using sniffing dogs after parts of the missing woman's body were found just off Highway 550. All 3 bears needed to be euthanized because, according to Colorado Parks and Wildlife Director Dan Prenslow, the public must be kept safe. The issue is that after a bear gets a taste for human flesh, there's nothing stopping it from going on the hunt and taking down as many hikers as possible in the remote Colorado wilderness. As for why the bear attacked the woman in the first place, she was probably in the wrong place at the wrong time. Then the bears ate her when they realized just how tasty she was. Number 4. An owl attorney. In Aspen, a man named Charles Abbott brought to court a very strange attorney. It was a stuffed owl. You might call this the most bird-brained idea of the century. Charles thought that appointing a stuffed owl as his lawyer would somehow win his court case. In all seriousness, though, bringing a stuffed animal to court and calling it your attorney seems like a great way to plead insanity, don't you agree? But what was the case about? Charles was accused of violating a protection order after assaulting his former roommate at an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. The order was apparently violated after Charles went to the victim's home to take some of his own belongings back while the victim was out of town. The entire case was pretty bizarre, and the icing on the cake was definitely that stuffed owl that Charles placed at the defense table and claimed to be his legal counsel. Charles also told the judge that the owl had a law degree from Yale, Harvard, and even Stanford. But even though the owl had so many degrees, it didn't say much during the proceedings. Weird that. In the end, nothing in the courtroom really got solved. The restraining order was still in place, and Charles still got in trouble. It sounds to me like he probably did need to go to a psychiatric hospital. So let's just hope that some amount of mental health counseling went along with his sentence. Number 3. All That Count Chocula. The Black Bottle Brewery in Fort Collins recently admitted to causing a shortage of Count Chocula cereal. As strange as this sounds, it really did happen. The brewery bought every last inventory of that iconic cereal, even causing a little bit of mayhem. One shopper was so furious that they wrote a letter to the Coloradoan complaining that they wait all year until October to purchase just a few boxes of that good Count Chocula, but they were robbed of their opportunity. But what exactly did the brewery buy up all the cereal and ruin this person's day for? According to the manager, it's an ingredient that goes into a beverage that's part of their Cerealously beer series. Count Chocula isn't the only victim. They also use Reese's Puffs, Golden Grahams, and even Cinnamon Toast Crunch to make beer that, to be quite honest, sounds kind of absolutely horrible. But considering how popular their seasonal brews have become, people in Colorado must really love their cereal beer. Or is it beer cereal? Beerial? I mean, that sounds disturbing, like maybe something a bunch of college students would drink on a dare. What's the most bizarre food combination or food flavor you've ever encountered? Some of these are probably going to be pretty strange, but definitely let me know in the comments below. Number 2. The Teeth Dealer. An embalmer from Brighton has been accused of stealing teeth from corpses. These innocent Colorado citizens who had died and been sent to embalmer Adrian Klein were basically grave robbed. According to the Huffington Post, Adrian was caught stealing gold teeth from dead bodies and then selling them for cash. He recently pled guilty in court to violating a pawnbroker law. He was sentenced to a 2-year deferred sentence for giving a pawnbroker false information. It's weird that he didn't get charged for actually stealing the teeth, but instead got in trouble for lying to a pawnbroker. It's not exactly clear what kind of weird Colorado law this is, but either way, at least he got caught. In fact, how he got caught is even stranger. He was going to the pawnbroker so often with dental gold that the brokers took notice. They reported that Adrian was creepy and weird. Now he's been accused of removing gold crowns from bodies and then scooping out the dental gold after cremation. That's not a bad little scheme, really, as disgusting and immoral as it is. He made about 17 sales and earned a total of about $4,000 from stealing teeth from corpses. However, now he's in serious trouble. Personally, it seems like he should have waited and melted all the gold together into maybe one bar before selling it, don't you agree? Number 1. The Scariest Mug Shot. One of the scariest people ever came from Colorado. From what we can gather, this monster of a human is a registered sex offender who may live currently in Springfield, Missouri. He also has the scariest mugshot ever. His name is Michael Campbell, and he has spent the majority of his life going in and out of jail ever since the middle of the 90s. But what's really crazy is how quickly he transformed from looking like an ordinary person to looking like he belongs in some kind of satanic cult. His mugshot was snapped in 2003 for theft committed in Colorado. He only had 3 facial tattoos at that point, and 5 years later, when he was arrested in Colorado yet again, his entire face was covered in ghoulish tattoos, including an upside-down pentagram on his forehead. He looked like a totally different person, and not like someone you would want to meet in a dark alley at night. This man's crimes are actually pretty heinous. We know that he was arrested recently for getting too close to a playground, though he was released just a few days later. We also know that he's on Missouri's sex offender registry. The big question is, why on earth is someone with a pentagram on their forehead and a history of abuse spanning over 20 years and several states still walking around free? In any case, if you see a man with a pentagram on his forehead, just run the other way. Emily Javier has pled guilty to attempted murder. That's right, murder. As it turns out, she was not a very good girlfriend, and it sounds like she had some serious red flags that her boyfriend probably should have spotted ahead of time. The 31-year-old woman from Washington State attacked her boyfriend and tried to slice him to pieces with a samurai sword in 2018 after accusing him of being unfaithful and becoming angry that he played too many video games. After the attack, she was sentenced to 19 years in prison. The charge was attempted first-degree domestic violence murder. She had no prior criminal history, and the court actually asked for 20 years, but she got off with 1 year less. This was no simple samurai attack, it was brutal. After dating for 2 years, Emily discovered the Tinder app on her boyfriend's cell phone. I mean, I guess that's kind of his own fault for being a bit of a scumbag, but even scumbags don't really deserve to be stabbed with swords, at least not in the eyes of the law. Emily was so upset that she purchased a sword from a mall in Vancouver, got her boyfriend good and drunk, and once he was asleep, she attacked. She messed up the attack, though. Instead of slicing his throat with the sword, she hit him with the blunt end of it, waking him up. He fought back and managed to make her stop, though he still lost a few of his fingers, got lacerations all over his body, and was cut so badly that metal plates had to be used to repair some of his bones. Prison time for her and permanent injuries for him. Perhaps they should have tried couples counseling first. Number 9. Naked and angry. Amelia Oxenford got busted on film throwing her boyfriend Alex out of their hotel room. The 21-year-old woman had stripped naked and attacked her boyfriend with a wine bottle while wasted at their hotel. This happened in West London, with CCTV surveillance cameras catching her chasing the guy through a corridor completely naked and try to bust the bottle open on his head. Apparently, the couple had gotten drunk together and then argued about Amelia seeing another man while they had been separated briefly. By the time the police had arrived at the scene, Amelia had already slashed open her boyfriend's nose with a shard of glass. But you might say being young and gorgeous really does pay off, because Amelia only got a night in jail and a fine of just over $300. She really did just try and stab her boyfriend to death with a wine bottle, and yet she got away pretty much scot-free, being ordered to complete a simple rehabilitation of 160 hours of unpaid work. Do you think that's fair that this young woman was only sentenced to community service, or should her punishment have been more severe? What would you have done if you were the judge? Tell me your thoughts in the comments section below. Number 8. Remote envy. Do you ever argue about who gets to hold the remote? Well, some people take it really, really personally. And for this couple, this is what made a girlfriend finally snap. A Florida woman got into some hot water after attacking her elderly boyfriend because they got into an argument over the TV remote. According to the New York Daily News, 23-year-old Amber Black was charged with assaulting an elderly person over the age of 65 and obstruction of justice after the incident in Palm Beach County. She tried to cut her boyfriend up with her fingernails and allegedly squeezed his groin area in such a way as to rip his private parts off of his body. She also punched him in the face and just went absolutely crazy with her attack on him. But here's where the lines begin to blur. This is a weird incident where the girlfriend's attack is also counted as elder abuse. When the boyfriend tried calling for help, she smashed the phone against the wall and screamed at him, "You're old and I'm stronger than you." In the end, the boyfriend had injuries to his shoulder, his thigh, and his face. The girlfriend, on the other hand, was released on bond. Whether the two are dating still is currently unknown. It's also unknown what channel the guy was trying to watch that caused the girl to get so angry about his hogging the remote control. So what kind of strange situation was going on here anyway? This young woman was dating a senior citizen and their relationship was so rocky that she attacked him? I guess you never know what just might push someone over the edge. What's your deal breaker? What pushes your buttons? Let us know in the comments below and be sure to subscribe to World List before you go. Number 7. Friends with Dad. Laura Jane Abram, 29 years old, was a pretty good girlfriend. That is, until she found out her boyfriend Calvin had messed around with another girl on the side. Rather than attacking him with a sword or trying to rip his face off, she got her revenge in a slightly sneakier way. From this point, the story gets pretty creepy for all parties involved. Laura started dating Calvin when she was just 16 years old, and they were together for a very long time. But ever since the beginning, she had suspected that Calvin's father had feelings for her, and that's pretty disturbing on all counts. After becoming a grown woman and having Calvin cheat on her, after over 10 years of being together, she was so angry that she tracked down his father and became intimate with him in the back of his car. She actually referred to it as a night of passion. Since this little bout of revenge, the relationship has ended and Laura says she's never been happier. Whether she and the young man's father are still passionately involved in weird locations like the back of a car, well, Laura really didn't say. Number 6. Not giving up the goods. A woman from Georgia named Tabitha Lee Grooms, 35, got into some trouble after beating up her boyfriend and her 66-year-old mother. The reason why is quite frankly shocking. According to the report from the Richmond County Sheriff's Office, Grooms became upset after her boyfriend refused to be intimate with her. She ran off and went out drinking. When she arrived back home that night, she attacked her boyfriend with her teeth and nails, scratching up his face and biting him on the arms. Her boyfriend was so afraid that he ran into the bathroom and locked the door and called 911. Then when her mother heard all the commotion, she came out to investigate. But Grooms told her mother to mind her own business and punched her in the eye. Then when the police showed up, she threatened to run over the police with a baby stroller. It sounds like this woman was more than a little drunk and clearly had little control over her emotions or actions. At the end, she was charged with 2 counts of battery. I just hope her boyfriend decides to break things off with her, 'cause that's just wild. Number 5. A long payment plan. A young British lady named Harriet wasn't exactly a bad girlfriend, but she certainly came up with a brilliant revenge plot against her ex-boyfriend that some might call genius. She broke up with her boyfriend Dan after finding out that he was cheating. You might say Dan was not the brightest bulb in the drawer. After being busted with another woman, rather than crawling away and being ashamed of himself, he got angry and asked to be repaid for a ticket he had purchased for Harriet to join him at a Justin Bieber concert. This all seems completely insane, and it's honestly hard to believe these people are out there, but that's what the boyfriend did. I suppose if he thought he was getting broken up with, he might as well try to get his pocket change back. So Harriet decided she'd pay him back. She made a payment plan to send him 1 cent every day until the full amount was paid. Doing the math, it'll take about 17 years for him to get repaid. I have a feeling he's just going to forget about it after a while. What do you think? Number 4. Looking at other women. A woman had a very heated argument with her boyfriend on an airplane that ended with her being charged with assault, kicked off the airplane, and a whole lot of bystanders screaming in horror. It all started after most of the people on the plane had been seated. Apparently, the boyfriend was looking at other women. But whether he had wandering eyes or not, her behavior was downright embarrassing. She screamed profanity while others on the plane tried to tell her that a baby was seated behind her and that she needed to lower her voice. Instead of doing that, she just got angrier. The flight attendants asked the woman to leave. Her boyfriend got up first and tried to run away, and she chased him down the aisle and hammer-fisted his back. The man screamed out, "Ah, you're assaulting me!" Though to be completely honest, it was really more of a slap. And it certainly wasn't a samurai sword to the face. I think the boyfriend was being a little bit childish here, but the girlfriend was certainly in the wrong overall. In the end, both the angry girlfriend and the whining boyfriend got off the plane and had to deal with the Miami-Dade Police Department. Number 3. Attack with a burger. A girlfriend in Florida has just spent 3 months in jail for beating up her boyfriend with a burger. That's right, with a cheeseburger. According to the Pinellas County arrest affidavit, Tanya Corradero denied smashing the burger into her victim's face, though when the police arrived at the scene, her boyfriend most certainly had hamburger bits stuck in his ear. Conflict allegedly began inside the trailer that the couple lived in. The argument was over whether to keep a window open or closed, and it somehow escalated into violence, at which point Tanya essentially tried to shove the burger down her boyfriend's throat, saying to him that she hoped he'd choke on it. Such an act caused her to be charged with misdemeanor domestic battery, at which point she spent 3 months in jail. But seriously, where are these people coming from? I swear it sounds like total nonsense to me. What are they up to behind closed doors these days? It's high time some of these people learn to use their words rather than physically fight, don't you think? Number 2. Pepper spray toilet paper. A girlfriend recently got fed up with her boyfriend's pranks and decided to out-prank him. The woman was dating someone who made YouTube videos and was constantly pranking her. So she waited until her boyfriend left the apartment. Then she played the cruelest trick ever. She took toilet paper from the bathroom and soaked it in pepper spray. As you can probably imagine, pepper spray is not something you want to be wiping with. It would be like pouring salt on an open wound, except way worse and far more excruciating. The girlfriend put the toilet paper back into the bathroom and waited for her boyfriend to come home. She then had to wait until he went to the bathroom, of course, but when he finally did, her diabolical plan paid off. Within just a couple minutes, he came roaring out of the bathroom in pain, clutching at his bottom. The girlfriend laughed, the boyfriend rolled around on the floor in agony, and the girlfriend offered to give the poor guy some ice to cool down, which he soon realized was also coated in pepper spray. In this case, it was the girlfriend who would become the ultimate prankster. Number 1. A fake funeral. A girlfriend made a fake funeral for her boyfriend. The reason behind the fake funeral is nothing short of preposterous. First of all, the woman thought that her boyfriend was cheating on her. She didn't like that at all. So she decided to convince her boyfriend's alleged mistress that he was dead. This was her evil plan to get back at the guy, and you know, there are really 2 sides to every story. Now, she may have been a girlfriend, or maybe vindictive is a better word, but he was also a bad boyfriend. He cheated on her right after she gave birth to their child. Not only that, but he may have been cheating on her the whole time she was pregnant. And things get even more wild. Shortly after discovering her boyfriend's cheating ways, he went to jail. It's not clear why, but we know he was out of the picture. Taking advantage of this absence, the woman messaged the mistress he had been cheating on her with, telling her the man was dead. She then used her own sister to carry out the fake funeral. Pictures were posted on social media. The scenario looked totally real, and everyone thought he was a goner. This lie has lasted for 3 years so far, and every year the mistress commemorates the love of her life's death on social media. She still thinks he's dead. Meanwhile, he's locked up behind bars and can't do anything to prove he's alive. It all just sounds like a bunch of silly people acting foolish on social media, if you ask me. What do you think would be a funny way to get back at a cheating partner? Hopefully not one that involves jail time for either party though, okay? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and come back soon for another awesome video.